Okay, I'm going to give everybody a second to get logged in and then we'll get started. But as many of you know, my name is Ginger. I'm the Executive Director of Connectionology Seminars of America, and we are so happy that you are joining us today. We have a wonderful webinar planned for you about carbon monoxide cases, and hopefully you saw the first one that we did several months ago. I'll make sure that you guys get a copy of that if you need it. There's also a copy you can find on our Connectionology YouTube channel. And but today's gonna be great. We're gonna be covering a lot of good information, and we encourage you to ask questions. And we'll probably take those questions around 3:30 or so after our introduction of one of our amazing partners, and then towards the end of the webinar as well. And then we'll be doing our special copy giveaway where we bring in Ted, who's going to announce the winner. But let's go ahead and get started. And I'd like to introduce everybody to Kyle. He is, as you know him, I mean, he's just one of the nicest guys you can ever meet. And we've been working with Kyle and HMR for, many, many years now. He's the Chief Revenue Officer for HMR, and he manages sales operations around the country for the organization. And he currently oversees the daily operations of business done in over 39 states where they currently operate. And he's also been with HMR since 2012, and he's been in the medical funding space for over 16 years. And in addition to that, HMR has had the opportunity to help fund several thousand cases with the primary concentration on funding TBI and catastrophic injury cases for plaintiffs who are uninsured. And Kyle, if I heard this correctly, did you already just get a promotion in HMR?
I did. It's kind of one of those be careful what you wish for type things.
Well, fantastic. We are so excited for you. And I can't wait to see all the good things that HMR is going to have coming up very soon. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. And I hope you guys have a great webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ginger. Thank you to everybody who's attending. You know, we're so excited that you're back for another installment of this. You know, we had such a great response from the first webinar we did with Randy that we had to bring it back, and obviously we've added Cody into this one, and he brings such a dynamic presence to it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll introduce you to Randy. For those of you who don't know, he focuses practice on representing victims of serious life-changing injuries, including those who have been harmed by large corporations and insurance companies. Randy is routinely asked to speak to lawyers and doctors to educate them on these issues, particularly in the area of representing victims of traumatic brain injuries. Randy is the immediate past chair of AAJ's Traumatic Brain Injury Litigation Group. And in 2016, Randy was honored to receive the Wisconsin Trial Lawyer of the Year. I can tell you through personal experience, not only is he a fantastic trial lawyer, but he's just a great person and a really wonderful resource. So I'm excited to turn this over to my good friend, Randy Rozek.
Thanks, Kyle.
You got it, bud.
Great to see you again.
You too, my friend. You too. I'm excited to see what you guys got in store today.
All right, let's get started. All right, Cody, is that full screen for you?
It is. Yep.
All right, so this topic is handling carbon monoxide poisoning cases. And the difficulty with carbon monoxide is that it can't be seen, smelled, tasted, you can't hear it. Only CO detectors can actually determine whether there is the presence of carbon monoxide. So what is carbon monoxide? It is the gas produced by incomplete combustion. So it can be any type of fuel burning appliance or device can produce carbon monoxide. And when I talk about incomplete combustion, I know, Cody, you'll get into that in more detail, but essentially what we're talking about is a fire that's not burning properly. Typically it is starved with, so when you have any type of fuel burning appliance, you have oxygen and you have the fuel source. And typically with high levels of carbon monoxide output, there is a starvation of oxygen. And Cody's done some tremendous work illustrating that and animating that, and we'll show you that. So let's start here, Cody. Can you describe what we're seeing here?
Yeah. And so you're seeing in yellow, that's methane. So that's the fuel source. It could be methane or it could be any fuel source, but you have sufficient oxygen. And so when you have sufficient oxygen, you have like a healthy blue flame. And so it releases carbon dioxide there, and you could see that in pink. But then when there's insufficient oxygen, it releases carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide there in green. And so it's a nasty, it even turns color. Actually, the flame actually turns color. And I learned that from a couple of really great experts, but that's the gist of incomplete combustion and kind of how it works on a molecular level. But also, the root or the cause of insufficient oxygen, a lot of times it's due to lack of inflow into the system. And so a lot of times it'll be like maintenance companies, okay? They don't properly clean filters and things like that. So over time, this bird screen, for instance, on this case, there was blockage, okay? And it got dirty. That bird screen gets dirty like all filters. And so these are actual inspection photos of there. That's really nasty, dirty filter, as you can see, totally overlooked by the maintenance company. And so what we're doing is, this is a liability illustration here to first pin liability and then talk about brain damage thereafter. But as you can see, because of that blockage, there was no sufficient oxygen coming into the system. And that's what those arrows represent. Air was coming in, oxygen was coming in, but very, very slowly. It was insufficient. And so, as Randy said, when you're talking about incomplete combustion, that's what caused it. It can also be if somebody cuts, an intake hole too small, it was improperly designed. It doesn't have to just be improper maintenance. But here, as Randy said, it's a silent killer. So we wanted to show really the, carbon monoxide and how it entered into the system. And so when there was improper inflow of clean, of air coming in, there was nothing to go out. And so all of that carbon monoxide just stayed in that room. And so we illustrated that per the expert witness opinion. So you could see the return air sucks the carbon monoxide in. And then there is no exhaust because there's no airflow coming in. And so, and that's the gist. And so what you're seeing with the skull and crossbones, that's the air that people breathed, unfortunately.
And that was distributed throughout this building?
Correct.
This was a commercial real estate building?
Yes. Yep, a bank.
Yeah, I think it was a bank, and there were separate office buildings within that commercial real estate.
Correct. Yep.
So that carbon monoxide migrated throughout the building.
Sure did. And we've got later illustrations showing how it migrated to the building and actually entered into the respiratory system as well.
I understand once the defense saw your animations, the case settled shortly thereafter.
Right.
Okay, so what do we have here?
Okay, so in a carbon monoxide case, you're going to see rust. Okay, and you're with insufficient oxygen. And why? Well, it's because it releases water with the improper combustion. There is a release of H2O, but it's not going out the exhaust. It stays in the room with the carbon monoxide. And so because it's not going out the exhaust, that water stays in the room, and you can see the water, it settles there, right there in the system. And so it rusts the actual heaters inside there because it doesn't go out the exhaust. And so there's normal rust and then there's carbon monoxide rust, and we're showing the stark differences here. And so there's what we call normal spillage. Not all the water leaves. And so you have normal H2O that builds up and rusts older furnaces. That's normal. But harmful spillage, where you have evidence of carbon monoxide, that water stays in the system and it rusts way, way more. And so this is evident. These are actual inspection photos. This is evidence of what we call harmful spillage. And that's because the water that's released with incomplete combustion stayed there and rusted out the furnaces. And we do a side-by-side comparison. The top is harmful rust and below is normal rust.
Any type of adequate annual or semi-annual inspection and maintenance would have discovered that, correct?
Yes, that was one of the experts' points on that.
All right, so let's talk about the fundamental elements of carbon monoxide. So we have one carbon atom combining with one oxygen atom to create the carbon monoxide molecule. Now, keep in mind, there's a distinction between CO2, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. I think in every case I've had, the clinicians and or the fire department and or the EMTs mix up the two and indicate that they were poisoned by carbon dioxide. That doesn't happen. It's carbon monoxide. And again, it's too little oxygen when there is some type of combustion, creating an unstable flame and producing levels of carbon monoxide. It's slightly lighter than air, but not significantly lighter. It's flammable, and again, it can't be seen, smelled, tasted, and it's toxic to almost all life. At certain parts per million, and I'll talk more detail about what parts per million means. All right, so we have the normal oxygenation process is that our red blood cells carry oxygen molecules, O2, from the lungs when we breathe in air to vital organs and body tissues throughout our body, including the brain. So here's what a O2 molecule looks like. One atom of oxygen equals an O2 molecule. And this is normal oxygenation. Oxygen comes in from our lungs into the red blood cell and combines with the hemoglobin molecules within the red blood cell. There are thousands of hemoglobin molecules within one red blood cell. And then it's delivered to our organs, and oxygen is released to those vital organs and tissues. So here we see O2 molecules combining with the hemoglobin. And because for simplicity reasons, we only have 4 O2 molecules, but there are actually thousands of O2 molecules in a single hemoglobin. And again, normal oxygenation. We breathe in the oxygen from our lungs, goes to the red blood cells, delivered to the vital organs, and then they convert the process after the oxygenation is that a CO2 molecule is released and carried back by our red blood cells to our lungs where it's exhausted. And then when we breathe in, we take in more new oxygen. When we breathe out, we release all the carbon dioxide that was carried back after the oxygenation process. Now here we have, this is the problem with CO. It binds to the hemoglobin. And it is 240 times more likely to bind to a hemoglobin molecule than oxygen molecules. Hemoglobin has an affinity for carbon monoxide molecules. Next up is the pathophysiology of carbon monoxide poisoning. There are 2 different processes involved in poisoning as a result of intake of carbon monoxide. There's hypoxia, meaning our organs and brain does not get enough oxygen. And then there is an inflammatory process that also goes on after carbon monoxide poisoning. All right, so within a hemoglobin, there are iron atoms represented by the Fe on the right. And when we breathe in carbon monoxide, we're also breathing in oxygen as well as carbon monoxide. Like I said earlier, the carbon monoxide molecules are 240 times more likely to bind to the hemoglobin. So this is for simplicity purposes, but there's actually more CO molecules likely attached to a hemoglobin depending on the levels of the air. But then the iron atoms actually act as a lock to the O2 molecule. So when the hemoglobin delivers what is supposed to be oxygen to our organs and brain, it's releasing more CO molecules and attaching more O2 molecules that are never allowed to release. Therefore, it's depriving the vital organs in the brain of oxygen. That's the hypoxia. That's from an acute poisoning and acute damage immediately as a result of the poisoning. Then, and this would be an entire 2-hour webinar if we were to go into detail about the inflammatory process. But suffice it to say, over the next days, weeks, and months, there is an inflammatory process as a result of the acute poisoning that further damages vital organs and the brain. Let's talk about proof. How do we prove our carbon monoxide poisoning cases? There are 4 lines of evidence that are not necessarily essential, but ideal in proving a case. There's preservation of the fuel burning appliance, ambient air readings, COHB levels, and abnormal imaging, and I'll talk in detail about each of those. Let's start with preservation. You get a phone call and somebody's been poisoned and you want to do next steps. Well, you want to preserve the fuel burning appliance. And one of the reasons you want to preserve that is so Cody can do his job. Because if you can preserve the fuel burning appliance, and not only the appliance, oftentimes there are leaks in the exhaust venting. And the CO never makes it out of the airspace. And then it's distributed to people in the building. So you want to preserve the fuel burning appliance, send out your spoliation letter immediately on behalf of the client, even if you haven't been retained, to put them on notice that they are to preserve it, that a claim may be made, that litigation may result, and they have an affirmative obligation to preserve it, and then arrange for an inspection so your engineer can go in before any of the exhaust venting is removed. You want to get everything documented, photographed, and ideally, if you can retain an engineer and get involved early enough in the case, they can recreate what had happened and develop a migration path. Cody, what's a migration path?
It's pretty much just the path that the carbon monoxide travels, and then is ultimately migrates to a person's lungs and then to their brain.
Right, and you'll show that in more detail in one of your animations, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so who are the target defendants in a typical carbon monoxide poisoning case? Could be a hotel. Unfortunately, it could be schools. Every state is different as far as the requirements of CO detectors. And unfortunately, many states do not require them in our schools. Office buildings, like we discussed earlier with that bank and commercial real estate property. Apartment buildings, even residential homes. And in a residential case, what we have on the left is a natural gas furnace. And you can see that one is the air intake, bringing in fresh air from the outside. The other is the exhaust venting. And the CO migration path could come out of the furnace itself. It could never make it enough into the exhaust venting, or there could be a breach in the venting. This in the middle is a hot water boiler. Some homes are heated with hot water boilers. And again, here is the venting, and it may not make it outside, or there could be a breach within the boiler itself, resulting in migration of CO into the space. And here we have a hot water heater. In almost every home, there's a hot water heater, unless there's a boiler that supplies the hot water heat. And this is a common item that can cause the release of carbon monoxide at dangerous levels. Those are the main fuel burning appliances in a typical residential case. Also boats. Boats can be dangerous and release high levels of carbon monoxide from the boat motor. And sometimes if you're traveling in a boat at a low speed, there can be a backdraft of CO back into the space that the people occupy on the boat. Cars with key fobs, especially hybrid vehicles, oftentimes people park them in their garage and don't realize they failed to turn off the vehicle, especially with hybrids. And what happens then is that they close the garage door and go into their homes in an attached garage setting. And when typically with catalytic converters, cars, when they're running with the engine, they don't give off high amounts of carbon monoxide. However, if they're in an enclosed space, then the engine is not getting a clean air supply. It's being deprived of oxygen by the carbon monoxide that's being emitted. And over time, then the catalytic converter can no longer do its job, and high levels of CO are emitted. And then they migrate into the living space. Generators give off high levels of carbon monoxide, and every time there's a catastrophic weather event, we hear about people being poisoned by portable generators because they're not putting them outdoors in spaces where they can get enough oxygen, clean oxygen, and then exhaust to the outdoors. But by the way, the generator industry is aware of this, and more expensive generators like the one Kyle probably has at his home, they have safety switches that shut off when there are dangerous levels of carbon monoxide.
Hey, I did want to interrupt, and I don't want to jump ahead because you might get into this, but there was a question that I got about, you talked about proof and kind of preserving things, the time from when somebody is poisoned and kind of capturing what their true exposure was. Because obviously, their levels can go down, once they start to get oxygen and stuff like that. So, and like I said, if you're going to get into this, I don't want to kind of give it away, but somebody was asking about, hey, how best to preserve those moments after somebody's been exposed to high levels.
So I guess any case involving carbon monoxide poisoning can be catastrophic, and it can be a 7 or 8 figure case for an individual that's poisoned. Typically in my cases, I have multiple individuals that are poisoned. And if there are dangerous levels of carbon monoxide, and I'll talk about the ambient air readings in a minute, then about half of those people that are poisoned will develop long-term cognitive, behavioral, emotional, physical problems. So it's best to try and get the fuel burning appliance preserved. Even if they give you custody of it, you can have your engineer preserve it and store it, but also inspect the venting before any changes are made, because if they change the venting and that was the migration path, then you have a problem. So expense-wise, it makes sense to get the spoliation letter out, get the client signed up, and get your engineer out to inspect.
Perfect. I appreciate you chiming in there.
Yeah, and keep in mind that sometimes the inspection doesn't really matter. We won't have that in a CO case, but we still have a great case because, for example, there may not be CO detectors. And at least in my state, they are required in residential living spaces. So there are other ways to do that, but there's no reason not to inspect, preserve, and inspect the exhaust venting, because Cody can do some wonderful things if that is done. And you'll see some of those. All right, and finally, for some reason, forklifts that are fueled by propane exhaust high amounts of carbon monoxide. And so, for example, your client may be delivering goods to a warehouse and there are high levels of CO and could be poisoned. then also obviously there's the workers' comp aspect. But I'm not going to touch on that because I don't do workers' comp. All right, Cody. Let's talk about some examples that you created and walk us through this.
Yeah. And this will only take a couple of minutes here. But so Randy, you touched on, there being holes in the exhaust. And that's enough. So that's not necessarily insufficient oxygen. That's just the exhaust not going all the way out to the top of the building. So we have a left side and a right side. And so how in the world do you show that carbon monoxide traveled from one side to the other? Because it was actually on the left side where the people got poisoned.
But this is the fuel burning source, right?
Exactly. And so they were
And there's
saying,
a wall.
how do you know?
There's a wall dividing the two.
Right.
That
And
looks like a complicated case in the beginning, but it turns out it's not so complicated, is it?
Right. That's
All right.
exactly.
Oops. Oh, it skipped ahead. Hold on.
Yeah. So we got the right side. And that's where the leak actually happened. So the carbon monoxide leak. And here's where the poisoning actually happened. And as Randy said, there's a wall. So how in the world do you know that CO gas traveled from one side to the other? How do you prove that wasn't their own, misuse of their own appliances? And so there was a vent. Well, let me first show you the hole. We've got pictures of the hole in the exhaust, and there was settlement on that heater, and it pulled the exhaust pipe apart. So instead of going out of the building, it went in this crawl space. And so what we're able to do is show when that exhaust leaks, when they turned on the other heater, it actually sucked it through. And it sucked it down because your HVAC system pulls in air and it distributes it throughout the house, right? Or throughout the apartment. Well, it was pulling in poisonous air. And so if you want to show the migration path, Randy, what you're saying about, hey, there shouldn't be any modification. Make sure there's no modifications to the ventilation system. This is why.
Wow. So the second fuel burning appliance was pulling in high levels of carbon monoxide, which would then result in even more production of carbon monoxide.
You know what? I didn't even think of that. And that's true. Yeah, because that's insufficient oxygen. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, good observation there. So yeah, it was, yeah. And then we actually show it going into, an infant, unfortunately, and went to an infant, and it was just pretty horrendous.
Okay. I just wanted to show, oh, there. Yeah, that's tragic.
A grandfather got poisoned, a mom and dad. I mean,
Wow.
But if you're, yeah,
I'm betting that case did not go to trial.
yeah, no. And Randy, a lot of attorneys may be watching this and they may be saying, okay, that's great, but how do you know that carbon monoxide so that's the expert's opinion that the carbon monoxide went from one side to the other, and you illustrated that. That's great, Cody, but how do you really know that is in fact true? And I want to explain kind of a tracer test. And I think it's it's this one. Yeah.
Are you ready for me to begin it?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay.
But what's really interesting in what you're saying about carbon dioxide, that's not toxic. But a fire extinguisher has carbon dioxide. When you set off a fire extinguisher, it releases non-toxic carbon dioxide. So that's the test here. So on the right side, what they did was they released carbon dioxide with a fire extinguisher. And then they kicked on.
Hold on.
Oh, no big deal.
Every time I pause it, it skips. Okay.
Yeah, and then they kicked on that furnace to the left. And what they're doing is they set up some carbon dioxide meters to really show, hey, did in fact this leak on the right side really affect what was on the left side? Because we know that people had carbon monoxide poisoning, but
Whoa.
was it that on the right side that caused it?
I don't know if our audience can see this, but this is the CO2 level, and it jumped from 178 to almost 5,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that was some serious 007 stuff that the expert witness was doing. And he got in there and the defense didn't know what he was doing. He started spraying that fire extinguisher, and they finally figured it out. And they're like, hey, stop that. But it was too late. It jumped to 5,000.
Wow.
And so you see the carbon dioxide actually all in that other room because it got sucked in. But we showed the previous one was the migration path. Well, we were able to discern that migration path and conclude that it was in fact accurate because of these tracer gas tests and these monitors.
All right, so this reading here is CO2 as well, but this is an ambient air reading.
Yeah, I believe that's a carbon dioxide reading in just a bunch of different rooms. He placed them all in different rooms, and so they're going to have different readings because I think that there was different air flow from the vents in each room. That makes sense.
So even though this is a reading of air of CO2, it's the same principle with CO. The fire department, EMTs, gas company, whoever's there will take ambient air readings to measure CO if there's a poisoning event. All right, let's talk a little bit about CO alarms. There's a national standard UL 2034. And when they developed these national standards, their goal was to save lives. And their goal was not to prevent brain damage or bodily tissue damage or organ damage. It was to save lives. And they literally decided that if they lowered the threshold for the sounding of a CO detector, that people would just take the batteries out or remove the CO detector from their home or apartment building or office building or wherever it may be installed. And so you can see that levels here, a typical alarm will not sound until the ambient air reading or parts per million is a minimum of 70, plus or minus 5, but for a duration of an hour to 4 hours. And that's incredible. It's incredibly dangerous is what it is, because for example, in the use of a hot water heater, you're going to trigger the activation of your hot water heater once, twice, maybe 3 times a day. So those levels could get up above 70 to dangerous levels, but then the CO in the ambient air dissipates over time and drops back below the threshold level for the sounding of an alarm. You know, it could be at 75 parts per million for 3.5 hours. Meanwhile, you're ingesting this air, and then it drops below that before the alarm sounds. So whenever I travel, and even in my home, I have a sensitive CO detector because I've represented too many people that have been poisoned in hotels, schools, anywhere they spend a significant amount of time. And then you see 400 parts per million. I believe that was the levels in that apartment building you just showed, levels of CO that was taken by the fire department. They measured 400 parts per million, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think I saw that on one of the slides of the animation. But that's an extremely high level. And again, 4 minutes to 15 minutes. Well, you could be taking in those levels for 10 minutes and your alarm is not required to sound. And then it could drop below that level again and again and again. And we call that chronic poisoning. There's acute versus chronic, and acute events typically involve high levels of carbon monoxide in a single setting, at least identifiable high levels where someone took a reading. But then you can also have cases that involve chronic poisoning over time. Again, the need for preservation in those chronic cases is very important, because otherwise you're relying upon your client's symptoms. They may not go to the hospital and get their blood tested. So preservation, preservation, preservation. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about ambient air readings. And again, those are the levels that are detected by the fire department, the gas company, EMTs, sometimes your retained engineer or industrial hygienist. And what it is a highly sensitive CO sensor with a digital readout. And the fire department or gas company will put on oxygen masks before they enter the premises if CO poisoning is suspected. Kyle, you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, I was waiting on Ginger. I know she wanted to bring in one of the sponsors, but I didn't want to interrupt you at the point you were at. So
It's perfect time.
Oh, okay. So all I need you to do is, I think, just stop sharing your screen for a sec, and then we can bring in one of our sponsors real quick.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. I am honored to bring in Kim with OnPoint Legal Nurse Consulting, who, by the way, Kim, we have missed you so much. We're glad that you're back with us today. But we love working with OnPoint. You guys have heard John Romano rave about them. He totally endorses the pain and suffering reports, and he says numerously how much that they're one of the best in the country. So Kim is going to tell you a little bit more about what they specialize in, but she is definitely somebody that you want to save her contact information in case you'd like to talk to her now or later on down the road. But Kim, thanks for being with us today.
Great, thanks, Ginger. It's always a pleasure. I've missed you too. I'm so thankful to be here. Just to tell you a little bit about OnPoint. We're a legal nurse consulting and full litigation support firm, and we've been helping attorneys now for about 30 years on any case that involves illness or injury. There's 5 key areas that we can assist you with. First is, we all know how difficult it can be to find the information you need in volumes and volumes of records. So we have a team of nurses that can do that for you. They will organize the records, index them, and return them back to you in an OCR format. If you find that you're getting bogged down with complex cases, maybe your paralegals could use some help. Our nurses in the consulting program, they have a lot of experience helping attorneys, and they make the complex information simple. And they do it through timelines and chronologies that include our unique case analysis, which outlines strengths and weaknesses, as well as identifies missing records, systems failures, red flags, and possible defense strategies. We can also identify the impact of pre-existing conditions and can differentiate between new versus aggravated injuries. Our nursing home and long-term care program assists with anything long-term care and geriatric related, from simple thumbs up, thumbs down merit screens to specialized experts who are very familiar with those standards of care. And as I always say, our program coordinator, Ingrid, who's been on these webinars, is a clinical geriatric specialist with over 30 years in that industry. Our expert witness program provides fresh, well-rounded experts in any specialty needed. They're all clinically active, located nationwide, and there's no risk or cost to you for us to search for the right expert. For damages, we excel at quantifying damages with our life care plans, and we have both physician and nurse life care planners, as well as our medical cost projections, which are a lower cost option for less complex cases. And for non-economic damages, as Ginger mentioned, our pain and suffering analysis really helps to tell the client's story. We quantify what the client experiences. We take that loss of freedom, loss of mobility, loss of independence, and we pull that information out of the records for you to expand upon. So I know records are all electronic these days, but if this still feels familiar to you, we can help. Our goal is to make sure you are not blindsided, to avoid surprises, and of course, simplify the medicine for you. We're accessible, easy to work with. You can email me directly. You can also submit information on our website through the Contact Us. Thanks, Ginger.
Absolutely. And we cannot thank you enough, Kim, for all of the good work that you do over at OnPoint. And I hope that everybody, again, will save her information. She's going to put it in the chat box for you. And Kim, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to you, and let's get back into this.
Hey, thanks so much, Ginger. Hey, before you guys jump into it, so I did get another question on the side. Cody, when you were running through some of the illustrations, everybody was kind of wondering a little bit, how much and how long you've been in the space. I mean, I've got like a list of credentials right here, 10 years in the construction field, $100 million worth of projects, accident reconstructionist. So I'm just curious if you could give everybody just a little bit of background right there, because some of the stuff is pretty dynamic.
You're muted, Cody.
Oh,
Hey, thank you. Yeah. So, I've been a civil engineer. I graduated with my civil engineering degree and then became a professional engineer, and actually was down there in New Orleans rebuilding some of the levees there, Kyle. And so I got some construction experience, but then realized very quickly that animations was the way to communicate with people as I was trying to explain complex engineering problems. It quickly turned to medical stuff, got some amazing medical staff. And but the 3D stuff just came naturally, because if you submit like blueprints to me or anything, it's CAD. 3D modeling and computer modeling, it's what engineers do. And so I've been doing this for maybe just over a decade, just for the legal industry. But I've been, it's almost been 2 decades since I've been doing animations and engineering type stuff, just in general. So
that's awesome, man. Well, you're aging better than I am, so hats off to you. All right. Well, look, we'll let you guys get back into it. Brandon, let you take it back over. Okay, bud?
Yeah, before I share my screen again, Cody, I just wanted to let the audience know that although you're a professional engineer, you work alongside our retained professional engineer, at least the one that we prefer to use in these cases. And so between you and he, you bring it to life. Otherwise, we just have our engineer explaining what it is that happened, but you're actually able to animate it.
Yeah, correct. So I just assist your expert witnesses. That's what we do. Illustrate it, bring it to life. So thanks for clarifying that, Randy. Yeah, I prefer not to be your expert witness for your constructionist. It's not as fun as creating the animations,
Right.
To me.
Well, that was apparent when we were preparing for this webinar. You really take pride and an interest in creating these visuals. All right, are we full screen again?
Yes.
Okay, so we talked about ambient air readings that will be taken on site in the event of a poisoning. Next, let's talk about carboxyhemoglobin levels. And this is the gold standard as far as the levels that your individual client had in their bloodstream. And actually the blood test that they're given is sensitive enough to result in a percentage of carbon monoxide that has bound to the hemoglobin. That's referred to as the carboxyhemoglobin level. And it's expressed in a percent up to 100. So we have the ambient air readings that's done on scene in the event of a poisoning. And then we have the carboxyhemoglobin levels in the blood. The other way the carboxyhemoglobin levels are ascertained is by a pulse oximeter, which I would say all EMTs have in their ambulance. And it's that thing that can measure oxygen concentration, but some of them can also level or detect carboxyhemoglobin levels, but it's never as accurate as a blood test unless it's by chance. The gold standard is the blood test. And I'll explain an example of that coming up, but I showed you that chart about parts per million. That's the ambient air reading and symptoms above and below where the detector would sound. Well, here's the carboxyhemoglobin level and the symptoms that are associated with that. I've had clients in the 40% range that were very near death. Anything above that, and it will probably result in coma or death. So something to keep in mind if you get, so what you want to get obviously are the EMT records, the utility company records, that'll give you ambient air readings, but then you want to get your client's blood work. And the blood work, when you determine that carboxyhemoglobin level, that percentage, let's say it's 20%. Well, carboxyhemoglobin has a half-life depending on what an individual is breathing in. So if it's normal room air, it's 4 hours to 6 hours that it will be reduced by 50%. So for example, if your client was getting sick and left their, say, apartment building for 5 hours and they were still sick and went to the ER and got that blood test and it was 20%, well, based upon the amount of time they were breathing fresh air, normal room air, it would have been double that at its peak. And that's called peak COHB level, peak carboxyhemoglobin level. And it can be determined by the right expert. So if CO is detected and if there's a pulse oximeter given and there's high levels, then the EMTs will put your client on rebreathable oxygen masks. And there you can see that the half-life is greatly reduced. So if they have a long ride to the hospital and then the hospital is busy and they're put on O2 in the ambulance and at the hospital, and it's 90 minutes before their blood is drawn, well, again, you can determine the peak COHB level because there would have been a half-life. It would have been reduced by 50%, meaning the peak is double whatever the readout was at the hospital in the blood work. And then hyperbaric oxygen greatly reduces it. But before they administer hyperbaric oxygen, they typically require a blood draw to determine the level. So usually you'll have a blood draw, a COHB level before the administration of hyperbaric oxygen, unless they have parts per million and the person is severely neurologically compromised. Then there may not be blood drawn because they feel there may not be time. Also, a lot of medical facilities do not have access to hyperbaric oxygen. So they may go to the first emergency department, blood may be drawn, all the while they're breathing the rebreathable oxygen. They're transferred to another facility that has hyperbaric, and then blood will be drawn again before that administration of hyperbaric. And keep in mind that if they're on O2 that entire time, they likely have a higher peak COHB level than that test. All right, so here we have, this is a readout in an ambulance report about carbon monoxide levels. It says above 500 parts per million throughout the residence. That's taken by one of those portable carbon monoxide detectors carried by the fire department. They took that as soon as they walked in the door, but look at this, it says above 500 parts per million. Well, the problem is the particular sensor and device that they used to determine the level maxed out at 500. So we don't know how high the ambient air levels were because it tapped out, or they call it pegging the meter at 500 parts per million, but that's not indicated anywhere in this report. It just says above 500. What the individual meant by that was it pegged out. We didn't determine that until we actually took his deposition. So whenever you see language like that, as far as ambient air readings, keep that in mind. In a different case, again, pegged out at 500, but doesn't say that. This 49% COHB level was taken by the pulse oximeter. And this is an example of why that's not accurate. And this patient was put on oxygen right away based on that symptoms. She was actually at a GCS of 3 when found. She was unconscious. And the pulse ox reading. All right, then she is given another pulse ox after the oxygen upon arrival at the facility, and the EMT indicates her CO reading came down to a 33. This is what a pulse oximeter device looks like, down to a 33. Well, this is an example of why the pulse ox is not accurate. In the ER, she's given a blood test, the gold standard, the one that is always accurate. And her value is a 38.9%, higher than that 33% that the EMTs indicated she had on the pulse ox. And this blood test was given after that pulse ox. Again, we can calculate peak COHB level based upon the amount of time that she was on oxygen upon the arrival of the EMTs and the time that this blood test was taken. All right, so oftentimes people think that the peak COHB level, say it's 50%, will determine the symptoms, the permanent symptoms that the individual sustained, but that's not the case. There's not a direct correlation between peak COHB level and ongoing symptoms or specific symptoms. What is true is that studies have shown if in cases where there's high levels of COHB, say above 10% for any significant period of time, or higher percentages for less amount of time, that 50% will develop some type of neurological, neurobehavioral, or cognitive sequelae. So new intake questions, fire department or gas company ambient air readings, source or cause. Sometimes the source or cause can be recreated and even animated despite destruction of the fuel burning appliance or venting if there's a decent investigation. So what happens as far as sourcing is that the fire department or gas company will put on gas masks and bring their sensor. Sometimes they'll clear the air of all the CO and then again initiate what they think was running at the time and use their CO sensor to find the source. You want to identify acute neurological symptoms, get the acute treatment records, determine the amount of time on non-rebreather oxygen, determine if there was hyperbaric and if so, how long, and then you want that gold standard blood test to determine carboxyhemoglobin level and ideally peak COHB level. All right, next I want to talk about the abnormal imaging that we see in carbon monoxide poisoning cases. These are the typically on structural scans, meaning a clinical, your average 3T MRI scan without advanced imaging. Globus pallidus lesions are the most specific to carbon monoxide, meaning the differential for globus pallidus lesions or atrophy is very limited. And so that's very sensitive to carbon monoxide poisoning. We see diffuse and focal white matter changes, dilated perivascular spaces, and hippocampal atrophy. And what does that look like? All right, so the imaging planes, if you're not familiar with this, I'm familiar with this from my brain injury days, but it's also very relevant in the carbon monoxide case work. So we have an axial view on the left, sagittal in the middle, and coronal on the right. Axial is horizontal from chin to top of head. Coronal and sagittal are both vertical, and sagittal is ear to ear, coronal is nose to back of head. Then we have our conventional imaging sequences, the T2, which will show a lesion as bright, T1 will show it as dark, and then flare is typical. Those are typically the three that we will see abnormalities with CO cases on conventional neuroimaging. All right, so here we have the purple is the globus pallidus inside the basal ganglia. And here's what these lesions look like. It's not really that visible On the left side of the image, which is the right side of the brain, this is an axial view. So the sides are switched as far as what we're looking at. The one on the left side of the brain, which was on the right side of the image, is pretty visible. Not great, not great, I admit. But we will get to something that showed it even stronger. And here we have the patient on the left and the published literature on globus pallidus lesions as a result of CO poisoning on the second, third, and fourth image. These are pretty visible, at least in the studies that the third and fourth for sure. Next are diffuse white matter changes, meaning they go throughout the brain in the white matter. They're not as focal as the lesions we'll talk about next. So these are large areas of the brain that show white matter changes or damage to the white matter. Here's a normal on the right, and it's pretty visible on the left. By the way, this was a chronic poisoning case, not an acute. We didn't have ambient air readings. We didn't have carboxyhemoglobin levels. All we had were her complaints and her neuroimaging, and co-workers that were also sick while on the property. In fact, we didn't even have preservation in that case, but we were still able to do illustrations showing the likely migration path. By the way, I wouldn't take that case again if I was offered it.
Hey, Randy, you did have a couple of questions, if I can chime in real quick.
Sure.
So we had one from our good friend Gordon Johnson. He was making the distinction that the pulse oximeter is not really inaccurate. In most instances, it understates the value by as much as 20%. Do you kind of agree with that statement?
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of inaccurate.
Well stated, well stated. The other one was about the imaging, and the question is, how soon after the event will an MRI or neuroimaging show injuries?
You know, that's a very good question, and it may make sense to do neuroimaging soon thereafter, and then a follow-up years later, because we know that that inflammatory process can take weeks, days, months. And so, for example, if the damage to, let's say, the globus pallidus was not due to the hypoxic event, the lack of oxygen, but rather the inflammatory process, again, you have that acute scan, say in the weeks following the incident, that does not show it, but then a scan 2 or 3 years later that does show globus pallidus lesions. Your experts are going to agree that the differential for the globus pallidus lesion is this event, most likely, and that it was damaged due to the inflammatory process, not the hypoxic event of the acute poisoning. I hope that answers it. All right, so here we have the diffuse white matter changes on the left in the patient, and we compare that to the literature, and it's very consistent. Again, the patient on the left, the literature on the right. All right, then also what we're seeing are focal white matter lesions. Focal just meaning obviously smaller, not the diffuse, but usually better seen than the diffuse changes, or at least better imaged, I should say. And then we compare that to the literature. All this literature is specific to carbon monoxide and brain damage. Next is dilated perivascular spaces. And here we have an example of the final one, hippocampal atrophy. What you're looking at in the white are the enlarged ventricles adjacent to the hippocampus. And because they're enlarged, it shows that the hippocampus is smaller because there's nowhere for it to go. And we compare it to a normal. And we compare it to the literature and a normal, actually. One more thing about the hippocampal atrophy. What you're looking at the top left is the patient scan. In that scan, there also may be what's called asymmetry. So basically what happens is that one side of the hippocampus is, although it's atrophied, it's not as atrophied as the other side, and that's called hippocampal asymmetry. And we'll talk about that with the advanced neuroimaging as well. So first I showed you globus pallidus lesions, and this is SWI. This is becoming more common clinically, by the way. So I'm not sure I'd even consider it advanced neuroimaging because I'm seeing it regularly on wherever there's a 3T scanner, they're oftentimes giving SWI. But what happens is that this is a traumatic brain injury case on the right, a severe one. But those little black dots are hemosiderin, iron deposits left by a brain bleed. And SWI is sensitive to those hemosiderin deposits. Remember the slide I showed you earlier compared to the literature, the the globus pallidus lesion in the patient on conventional neuroimaging was not that visible. But then you use SWI, and what you're looking at is SWI showing globus pallidus lesions through the deposit of bloodstains, essentially. That's a hard one to deny, and it's very sensitive to carbon monoxide poisoning. Next is diffusion tensor imaging. I'm not going to go to too much detail about this, but just picture a garden hose with a leak in it, and the water is not getting from one end to the other. And DTI measures bundles of axons. So the garden hose is only one axon. DTI is only sensitive enough right now to measure bundles. So here we have the axon on the left, damaged, and here's the measurement of DTI. It's measuring this bundle. And I think a lot of DTI, now they're measuring, I want to say 43 bundles on each side of the brain. So there's a lot of bundles that they're measuring. And here's what's called tractography. And each colored line represents a bundle. All right, and this is used to show, you saw in the video how many bundles there were. Well, there is a lack of bundles showing, meaning that the bundle of axons are damaged. Here to get, this is normal on the right, damaged on the left. Here's another way to show it. So these bundles that I talked about, here we have the external capsule. That is a bundle of axons. The posterior thalamic radii, I think it's radiata, but it says radiation. And then the posterior corona radiata. So what we're looking for are 2 standard deviations or more from the norm. That's a significant finding. And here are those bundles showing the jury what it is where the DTI is looking at. And then oftentimes what's ideal is if we can show on conventional imaging the same thing we're showing on advanced neuroimaging. And this is a white matter hyperintensity on the left on an axial flare image. And this is the DTI, where there was also an abnormal reading on the DTI and the advanced neuroimaging that just happens to coincide with the conventional neuroimaging. Try to walk away from that one. Next up is volumetrics, and I'm not familiar with any volumetrics other than NeuroQuant. And so earlier I showed you some hippocampal atrophy, and what we have here is the the size of the hippocampus is in the 8th percentile, which is low. And then we can show that with a normal patient and the conventional neuroimaging. But also remember, I talked about hippocampal asymmetry, and this was extremely valuable in this neuroquant post-production because it showed the left-right asymmetry index, and it was at the 2th percentile, which is abnormal. And also very specific to brain trauma or damage as far as asymmetry. And here we have showing it on the conventional neuroimaging, what we had just shown with advanced neuroimaging. Next up is perfusion MRI, and this is measuring blood flow. And the one on the left, we see a normal on the right. The one on the left was my client that showed those diffuse white matter imaging scans that just happened to coincide with the perfusion study on the left. Very powerful. This is her actual conventional image, the axial T2 flare showing the diffuse white matter changes, very consistent with the perfusion. And this on the left is a different patient who had frontal white matter changes consistent with her perfusion study. MRS. MRS is a technique that's been around for over 2 decades to detect tumors in the brain. And what it does is it breaks down the brain into 20 different sections, and then it measures biochemical changes in the brain, and it gives a readout. So this is normal. And what we see here, this is called a Hunter's angle. What you're looking for in normal is 45 degrees. What you can get is, here's 45 degrees. This is not 45 degrees. It's supposed to be 45 degrees when it compares those different biochemicals. Oh, and then also, by the way, those areas of the brain and the ones that are not 45 degrees may coincide with your conventional neuroimaging or other advanced neuroimaging techniques. All right, now let's talk about something I'm excited about. And these are the illustrations and animations that have been created by Cody, not specific to this presentation, right? You've created these over the years?
Correct. And with some, neurologists and other, medical professionals. But you're talking about perfusion, right? And we can create these from your imaging to where we can relate some of the densities of specific colors and correlate that to a 3-dimensional vascular system. And so if you saw the presentation of with Dr. Parker a couple of weeks ago, we're developing that actually for her curriculum at Harvard. But it's really to make it organic to where you can actually see it, and then to change the colors of the vascular system to show what levels are not getting blood and what levels are, just in an illustrative fashion.
I did see that, and I was fascinated by it because is this based upon SPECT, this image we're looking at?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I don't use SPECT in my advanced neuroimaging, but because of that presentation, I've reconsidered. So describe what we're looking at here. So
actually, and it's any imaging that can show blood flow. So if it's perfusion, MRI, or whatever it is, we can use that if it's in a sequence. And what we do is we have a neuroradiologist or whoever, your expert, we have them say, okay, where in these slices is this occurring? And we have different densities. Okay, this is level 4. This is level 3, whatever it is. And then what we do is we just make that 3D. And so what you're seeing here is if you look at the darker portions, and you may not be able to see it on this screen, we probably should have used a white background. But if you're looking at the darker portions of the vascular system, that is the part that is lacking O2. And then the brighter red, so towards the middle there, it's lacking oxygen levels, and the brighter levels have more oxygen, because there's different parts of the brain. It's not just a surface level. These are volumetric, pieces of the brain that lack oxygen or have oxygen. And so we're able to show different damages and lack of function there too.
This is based on mathematics, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
it's mathematically accurate.
Yeah. Those are mathematical formulas that actually make those shapes of that vascular system actually.
I didn't play that whole video.
And the advantage of slicing it down and doing our brain cut there is, see, there's the damage. Do you see that? So you see the contrast between normal and abnormal. High perfusion levels, or I'm sorry, low perfusion levels and high perfusion levels, high carbon monoxide poisoning, low portions of the brain. And on the surface level, we can show, these white matter lesions like you were talking about, lack of oxygen, and that lack of oxygen does discolor in that fashion. Enlarged ventricles, right, with the spinal fluid gets trapped in there, and then it causes, you've got necrosis as well.
That's amazing.
But, being able to visualize that and have your expert, this being perfectly harmonic. Now what you're saying is that when those ventricles enlarge, that shrinks that portion of the brain there. Yeah.
Right there, yeah.
You have the hippocampus. And so, because there's nowhere to go, well, actually, now you're seeing that. It makes a difference in the expert's testimony.
You remember when you first showed me this?
Kind of.
Yeah, you said, I don't know if it'd be relevant. And I said, well, you pretty much just shown everything that I'm going to be describing in my neuroimaging presentation, but you already had it created.
It thrills me. That absolutely thrills me. And I love this one because we can slice any way you need. Brainstem, anything you need, we can slice and dice and discolor. We just gotta, all we have to do is just talk to your expert, get your imaging, and make sure all of our illustrations are in perfect harmony with their testimony. And yeah.
Do you actually work with the DICOM files itself?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Yep. That's a huge thing, actually. So.
All right, and describe this for us.
Yeah, that's just that is an exemplar. As you said, Randy, this person is probably not living. That is true. But we're showing here just brain hemorrhaging, and that's surface level. But we can also, by the way, we use the DICOM files to create volumetric brain hemorrhaging, and we can actually make that brain slightly transparent and show the shape of that hemorrhage all the way around, and zoom in, pan all around. I wish I would have included that one too. I'll send that to you after the presentation. But
Cody, I have an alternative theory about this one. Fun fact, in early 90s, Herschel Walker played for the Vikings. And so he was in Minnesota in the winter, and it was cold outside, and he wanted to listen to music. So he took his dog in his car and started listening to music with the engine running, and poisoned himself with carbon monoxide. And he was found by his wife unconscious because the dog was barking. So the dog saved his life. So this could be his brain.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right, what is this showing?
Yeah, just a surface level necrosis. So we could show that, we can use that same vascular image that we showed before to show vascular necrosis, right? When there's not oxygen going to certain portions of the brain. But if you want surface level, this is a little bit more illustrative and more budget worthy as well. But this is just necrosis of the brain as portions lack oxygen. It starts to literally rot and die. And so that's showing people that, when they look at somebody in a courtroom, they may see a normal, sometimes a pretty attractive person that's well dressed, but you show this is what's really going on inside. I've been told it makes a difference.
I would think it would.
Yeah, inflammation of the brain, like you said, can even take almost a year sometimes to fully happen. And so a lot of times we'll take before. We just had a case, actually. We just completed one yesterday. We'll do one before or just right after the incident, and then even 2 years after the incident to show the drastic effects years later.
All right. And finally, I want you to explain to our listeners the importance of this slide, because I didn't get it at first. I was like, well, I'm never going to show that to a jury. What is this?
Yeah. I would never show that to a jury either. Your brain might explode. My brain exploded. This is just to show, hey, look, we have 3D modeled every single section, every single component of the brain. And so if you've got maybe 3 or 4 specific components of the brain, all we have to do is delete all the rest of those. And it's almost like a custom boilerplate, right? We've got it, all we got to do is delete. And so if you have, if you're budget conscious, we can do this and we can do these affordably as well.
So basically, if one of these areas, or I should say 3/4 or 75%, maybe even 90% are not relevant to the case, you simply delete them.
Exactly.
And it saves everyone money. And it saves you time.
Yeah, I love it. And we become friends when we become new clients. And so when you get that home run case, call me and we'll work together. So.
Right. So because you've already created the 3D brain, you don't have to start from scratch on every case.
That's correct. Now there are, when we were talking about custom perfusion levels and damages, it does, and you want to illustrate it volumetrically, it gets a little tricky, but for the most part, yes. If we're just discussing anatomy and describing things on a surface damaged surface level, we can do that pretty easily.
Right. So especially if we have like a clinical scan with just standard neuroimaging techniques, it's not going to take a lot for you to show the necrosis or damage.
It won't take long. And actually, I mean, we can, if you don't want to do the whole sequence, we can just focus on one sequence, one slice, one image, colorize that, insert it into the 3D brain, and show how that corresponds to the brain in a very compelling and intuitive way that anybody can really understand.
That's awesome. Thanks, Cody.
Yeah.
Before we conclude, I want to bring up a point. Gordon has texted me, and I did not understand his point at the time about the inaccuracy of pulse ox readings. His point was that they may not be precise, but what they do is they underestimate the level of COHB in the blood. So for example, when my client got to the ER, the EMTs took the pulse ox reading and it was 33. When she later had a blood reading, the gold standard, it was a 38. So pulse ox historically underestimates COHB level. And then Gordon pointed out that he resolved a case for tens of millions of dollars based on a pulse ox reading.
That's awesome. Hey, Cody, real quick. So I'm sure nobody ever comes to you and says, you know, hey, I need this yesterday. But I'm curious, in a perfect scenario, you know, how much lead time are you looking for in an ideal scenario?
Yeah. For some of the, you know, well, I'll start with the candy first. The simpler stuff, you know, we can turn around in less than a week. Okay. All right. So the stuff that kind of Randy was describing, we can get it done. And some of the people watching have thrown that upon me once or twice. I need to talk to your experts, and they need to give me feedback really, really quick. That's the biggest bottleneck, is getting approval from the experts in clear communication. As soon as I submit it, please give me some feedback really quickly if we've got tight deadlines. Okay. But you know, the more complex cases, you know, a month or two, please, 2 months, please. So we can really get you something amazing. And if they're complex and you're spending that amount of money on it, we want to put in the time and just get it right for you. So.
Got it. Well, you know, there's been so many, you know, illustrations and things talked about today. You know, you guys really kind of hammered home a lot of the main points for people. I'm guessing that's why y'all only had a handful of questions today. You know, I'll put this point on it for everybody who's watching from our standpoint. You know, we've been fortunate enough to, you know, at HMR to work with, you know, Randy on some of his CO cases. You know, he talked about some of the cognitive impairments and long-term effects that a lot of these people who have this kind of exposure go through. And for our part of it, you know, we've obviously been able to partner and work on getting these people the medical treatment they need, whether it's neuroimaging or, you know, cognitive therapy, and everything in between. You know, and I think the exciting thing for us as a company is, you know, being able to now help out with what Cody's doing. You know, if he's going to come into a case and he's going to be doing the illustrations, he's going to be putting, you know, his effort into it. That's something we can also incur the expense for, paying for all of those litigation experts now. So, you know, I think the goal of these programs is to give you the educational information, but also, you know, give you the resources to be able to get it all done. And so, you know, we really can't thank both of you enough for your time. I know you're both extremely busy, but it's always great to kind of have everybody come together and be able to share with the viewers what's going on. So,
Hey, Kyle.
Yes, sir.
Let me just offer you a shameless plug. You and HMR, put it that way, have connections throughout the United States with certain medical providers, specialists, and what you were able to do for me in one of my carbon monoxide brain damage cases helped considerably. My girl lived in a rural area and couldn't get medical treatment despite the doctors saying she needed it. And HMR was able to fund her inpatient stay at a brain injury rehab facility. And I can tell you personally that she gave a deposition before that happened, after the incident, but before that happened, and didn't do so well. She gave a second deposition after her inpatient stay, and she learned so much about her deficits, her shortcomings as a result of the poisoning, and how to cope with those. And she was able to describe that in ways I never could have taught her to. So I appreciate you guys, man.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the opportunity. Those are the feel-good stories. All right. Well, I see my good friend Ted. So that must mean we're here for our coffee giveaway. So, Ginger, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ted is here to announce the winner of the HMR copy giveaway. And then also I wanted to remind everybody that I am going to be sending you the contact information for all of our incredible speakers and let's see, and our partners. I'm going to share this with you guys real quick. This is what I'm going to email you, and I hope you can see everything. Can you see everything okay?
Yes.
Fantastic, because I highly encourage you guys to save the information for Kyle, Randy, Cody, and Kim. And again, I'm going to email this to you as soon as the webinar ends, but I'll make sure that you guys are able to stay in touch with them. And in just a few minutes, I want to go back to Cody and to Kyle just for them to explain a little bit more about what you guys do. That way everybody is aware. So in the meantime, though, we do have Ted here, and Ted is here to announce the winner. This is always one of the best parts of the day. Ted, let us know who is the lucky winner today.
Sure, I'm excited to announce it's Litzy Torres, and she's out of Cottonwood, Utah, and she might be the first Utah winner we've had. So I'm thinking she might be the first. So that's pretty awesome. So congratulations.
Congratulations. Yay, let's see. Well, Ted, I know both you and I are going to reach out to her as soon as this webinar ends, but we hope that you enjoy the copy. And if you didn't win, don't worry, you guys, because I've got 4 brand new webinars in December that are coming up, with 2 that are going to be starting next Wednesday and Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern time. So we'll be launching those before the holidays. And then, of course, after the holidays, we'll be starting back some more webinars in January as well. But congratulations to Litzy, and then thank you, Ted, for being here with us day in, day out, and then also, you know, providing coffee for everyone. We love this.
Welcome. Keep everybody energized.
And absolutely. And then now I just want to go back to you, Kyle, and Cody.
Sure.
I'd like for both of you guys just to kind of let us know a little bit more about what you do, and how you can help everyone who's watching today.
Sure. Cody, go ahead, brother.
Oh, sure. Well, hey, first I want to thank Randy. You know, working with Randy, and it's just an honor presenting with these people. We're able to do what we can do because, you know, you guys are hiring the right experts. You guys are amazing attorneys. And when in communicating with us, you know, what your needs are and the purpose of what you're doing. And so when all that comes together, we're able to deliver a great product. And I just love working with really great clients. I have a lot of attorneys that have just become my good friends, and it's just been really great. So, you know, that's what we do. We communicate. We communicate hard to understand information in compelling ways that people can easily understand, and they're accurate, right? And so, in a nutshell, that's what we do. I love it. I love connectionology. I love working with all of the people and the network in connectionology. And so that's my pitch.
Hey, Cody,
Yes, sir.
after seeing your work product over the last few weeks in preparation for this, you're going to be seeing a lot more of me.
Oh, hey, that's a blessing. And we will become close friends, man. I hope.
All right, man.
Yeah, and look, for our part of it, like I said, you know, we've been really fortunate having a national practice and being able to work with attorneys around the country, guys like Randy. It's easy when you work with good trial lawyers. Obviously, we're in the business of funding, you know, catastrophic injury cases. We're now funding the litigation expenses that trial lawyers ultimately will incur when they're trying to prepare for trial. And we're also doing the pre-settlement funding where, you know, clients can get what they need as the case is going on to help sustain them through the process. And we do it all in partnership with attorneys around the country every day. Brain injury just happens to be one of our niches. And, you know, obviously we don't shy away from the complex stuff, but, you know, I think the best part about us is, to Cody's point, you know, we like to give as much access as we possibly can and communicate on difficult situations. So, you know, it's just a blessing to continue to work here. And Ginger, thank you for always making, you know, this platform available. So
Thanks, Ginger.
Oh, it is such an honor to work with all of you guys. And thank you so much, Randy, Cody, and Kyle, for being here with us today to share all this great information. I saw a question come in that where can they watch the recording of this? And if you give me until about like Friday afternoon, I will make sure this is up on our Connectionology YouTube channel. So you guys can rewatch it and you can share it with all of your colleagues and people that you work with as well. But again, thank you so much to all of you guys for being with us today. And then I see some wonderful comments already coming in the chat box. Great job, Cody and Randy. Excellent webinar. Thank you so much, Gordon and Jeff, for your wonderful comments. We will see you guys back here again next Wednesday and Thursday. And again, I'll have those webinars added in the next couple of days. But take care, everybody. And unless there's anything else you guys would like to share, we'll see you back here soon.
Great.
Hey, guys.
Right on time.
All right. Bye, everybody. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.